Presentation today. I'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Richard Gingras, who is the Vice President for News at Google in the United States. He's been at the forefront of new media and the development of online services and software for about 30 years now. And being at the forefront of new media for 30 years, it sounds a bit like an oxymoron, right? But then new media always tends to evolve, always changes, and he's been in the thick of things for about 3 decades now. I'd like to hand things off to Richard to kick things off for us this morning. Richard?
Thank you very much. You know, interestingly, I was looking at the calendar the other day, which for someone my age is a bit like a Halloween nightmare. And I realized my career, which I'll mention in technology and media, goes back almost 50 years. I need to update the bio, I guess, as painful as that is. I'm so glad to see you all here in Hong Kong. And I am honored to be here in Hong Kong to discuss the evolving role of journalism in our open societies. This is a very seminal period. I know this because I have been dancing at the intersection of media, technology, and public policy for my entire career. At each chapter, I have worked on the expansion of media distribution, from the early use in the 1970s of satellites to deliver television programs to far-flung television stations in real time, and for exponentially less expense than the prior mode of using leased telephone lines. It changed the breadth and nature of television programming, change in media distribution. Satellites triggered the explosion of cable television, multiplied the number of channels users could see from 5 to 500. I was in the room way back when Ted Turner introduced the cable news network, CNN, with the stated objective to deepen news coverage, to be able to do not 1 minute and 50-second news reports, but maybe half-hour news reports on a singular story. But then I witnessed the sad devolution of Turner's vision for the emerging category of dedicated news channels into a divisive opinion programming versus fact-based news coverage. That's what we see almost all of the time on cable news channels today, at least in my country. In 1980, I created one of the first interactive news products using broadcast teletext to give users, for the first time, on-demand access to news and information. And then, with the dawning of the internet in 1994, I oversaw the creation of online portals and search engines, in my case, the Excite search engine, that eased consumer access to the extraordinary ecosystem of expression and knowledge that evolved into the internet of today. The internet has indeed put the printing press into everyone's hands. And I think it's important to note that with every change in media distribution comes friction between those who want to expand expression versus those who want to control it. One of the great privileges of my role is the opportunity to talk to people engaged across the spectrum of media, from traditional publishers to digital players, from members of civil society organizations to data scientists, from aging veterans like me to young millennial reporters looking to make their mark. Today, we're seeing significant challenges to the free press around the world. While the internet has expanded free expression, politicians are campaigning against the press and the role that journalism must play in open societies. The struggle between authoritarian governments and the role of the press is something we're getting to know all too well all over the world. Today, I will focus on the future of news and the need to evolve our journalistic approaches to meet the needs of today's digital society, today's generation of users. I will discuss the need to evolve sustainable business models for quality journalism in our digital age. But let's first step back to see where we came from, because it might help us understand where we are headed. In 1994, I was at Apple overseeing the creation of a pre-internet online service called eWorld. At that time, the World Wide Web had fewer than 3,000 websites. Today, the World Wide Web is composed of 1.7 billion websites, an explosion of expression beyond what we might have ever seen nor could have fully imagined. Again, in open societies, the internet is the epitome of free expression. It changed how we communicate, how we learn, how we shop, how we sell, how we are informed of issues of the day, and how we form opinions about the issues of the day. It changed how we develop perceptions of the world around us and of each other. The internet exponentially expanded the marketplace of ideas, the marketplace of information, the marketplace of services. It brought extraordinary value to our societies, and yes, it introduced new challenges to our institutions, to our politics, and yes, to journalism itself. At an existential question, it poses the paradoxical question, how can democracies survive and thrive in an environment of unfettered free expression? Democracies succeed by their ability to achieve consensus between different views. How do democracies survive and thrive in an environment that requires bridging gaps between alternate realities? How can we bridge that gap with an abiding structure of commonly accepted facts from respected sources? Facts matter. The profession of journalism matters. For all of us who are involved in the pursuit of journalism, from the journalists themselves to publishers who support their efforts, to the role of Google in guiding users to that important work, how can we evolve new approaches in quest of commonly understood facts and not fall prey to amplifying our divisions? Yes, the internet happened. It dramatically lowered the barriers to publishing. It created this vast marketplace of information, a richness of choice that triggered dramatic changes in user behavior. Think back 30 years ago to newspapers like the South China Morning Post, the Straits Times, the Daily Inquirer, or for that matter, the Providence Journal back in the United States where my dad kept the presses running and where I had my first job. You could think of them at that time as the internet of their communities. They weren't interactive, but they offered all the information one might need to live one's daily life. Yes, the local news, but also all the mundane but useful information one might want, from job listings to movie reviews, from articles about fashion trends to recipes and much more. Yes, mundane, but immensely valuable as a magnet to advertisers. That vast marketplace of the internet changed our behaviors. Think about the differences. When I turned 16 and was old enough to drive, my dad bought me a used car through the classifieds of the local newspaper. Would you do that today? No. You'd go to Craigslist in the United States, or maybe Gumtree here in Hong Kong. When my mom wanted a new recipe for Sunday dinner, she clipped one from the newspaper's food section, along with the coupons for discounts on the ingredients. I found a book of her clippings not too long ago. Now my spouse and I go to Epicurious.com or BonAppetit.com or New York Times Cooking, or we order food to be delivered from an array of restaurants. When I graduated from college, I found my first job in the job listings of the Washington Post. Today, that would happen on LinkedIn. Years later, when I could finally buy a house, I went to the Los Angeles Times. Now I'd go to Zillow or realestate.com in Australia or the many home listing sites in this region here. Our information access behaviors changed. We go to different sources, different websites, different businesses. Not surprisingly, the advertising dollars moved with those behaviors. This has not been good for the business models of newspapers. As consumer behavior changed, the business model became less effective. Understandably, though painfully so. The ad revenue generated by classifieds, by movie ads, by supermarket ads is no longer what it once was. And it was that revenue that cross-subsidized the serious journalism. Hard news in general interest newspapers has never been a major draw for advertisers. Some media companies in this modern era responded by investing or acquiring new online businesses. In Australia, News Corp owns realestate.com, the largest real estate listing site in Australia. In Germany, Axel Springer owns Stepstone, the largest job site. But these businesses are separate. They have their own balance sheets. Understandably, they no longer subsidize the creation of news on the Australian, in Sydney, or on Bild in Berlin. Bottom line, the business model of journalism changed. That does not mean providing quality journalism cannot be a successful business. However, the models allowing journalism to flourish will be different, and in the view of some, more effective than the past. How do today's publishers build these relationships with people who have not grown up subscribing to newspapers, much less receiving physical papers? How can publishers foster those relationships through new engagement, through deep and meaningful coverage, in a world where the millennial generation is likely to do what many generations have done, develop an affinity with new sources of news? How do news outlets impact the lives of readers in positive ways? This is our context for news media today. These are the challenges as well as the opportunities that journalists, publishers, and yes, tech companies like Google face in collaborating towards a successful future. Google is engaged in many ways to find and support solutions. We continue to learn and evolve our approaches. I see no other path. Collaboration is the only path. Google supports publishers and journalists by helping people find their journalistic work and sending them directly to your sites. Today, we send more than 24 billion visits to news sites each month. That's 9,000 visits to news sites each and every second. This traffic has enabled many smaller or emerging publishers to get discovered, grow a business, and find success online. It has enabled legacy publishers to expand their audiences far beyond the reach of print distribution. More news is being consumed than ever before, throughout the day, in new and different ways, from a mix of sources, both old and new. I've traveled across the region over the last year and have had many conversations with publishers hailing from many different countries, from New Zealand to Taiwan. In every instance, publishers are eager to work more closely with Google as we are willing to work with them. Consider our efforts with reader revenue, with subscription tools. That was a collaboration from the start, involving publishers from around the globe. The result was the creation of a suite of tools that publishers can use at their option to increase subscription revenue. The business relationship, as you might know, with subscriber at Google is powerful and unique. 95% of the revenue generated through our subscription tools goes to the publisher, along with the customer information necessary to build further engagement. You subscribe through Google, we send the email address, and if necessary, the physical address to the publisher. It's available to all publishers, large and small, traditional and digital, and we have a long roadmap to continue developing it. Consider this in comparison to other players where the revenue share is 50% to you and your customer's name is unknown to you. We're seeing promising growth in reader revenue in Asia. In Japan, Nikkei is adding 50,000 digital subscribers every year, and the Hindi in India is celebrating 100,000 paid subscribers to their e-paper edition. Our Google News initiative is investing $300 million to support news publishers around the world in innovating with new products and business models that fit the publishing marketplace the internet has enabled. I don't say that looking for kudos. I say that just to be clear on the approaches that we're trying to take to move the industry forward, move us all forward together. Let me give you an example. One new news marketplace is audio programming, enabled by smart speakers and smartphones, from news reports to podcasts of all varieties. This is the reinvention of radio. The New York Times sees this marketplace as one where they are the disruptor, not the disruptee. Their podcast, The Daily, now reaches more than 2 million digital listeners. We are at the early stages, but Google is making large investments with news publishers to develop this powerful new market for the spoken word. We're also making major investments in tools for journalists in your newsrooms, and this is an area of which I'm very proud and very close to. We're applying our abilities in machine learning to provide free tools that can give journalists the power they need to do their work in this digital world and reduce some of the drudgery along the way. I speak of tools like Backlight, which we're now testing with many of you, that allows journalists to more easily analyze massive collections of documents, or tools like Harvester that can turn a stack of restaurant code violations into a spreadsheet. Google has done its best to be at the forefront of the evolution of the fact-check organizations around the world. We created the schema for that some 5-6 years ago. We have eagerly supported efforts across Asia-Pacific, like CheckFakta in Indonesia, as well as in India through the GNI India Training Network, ahead of the elections earlier this year. One more step to help journalism organizations earn the credibility they deserve by standing out in the maelstrom of expression we all now encounter. Last but not least, we continue to improve how we connect people to the most authoritative sources of reporting. Just last month, we made ranking changes and updates and published changes to our search rater guidelines to help better recognize original reporting by surfacing it more prominently in search and increasing the visibility of the original work. As part of this effort, we're expressly looking to identify those outlets that are more likely to create original programming, original reporting, feet on the street reporting, and give added emphasis to presenting their work. Here too, the evolution of technologies like machine learning is allowing us to do this job better, to understand the components and structures of evolving news stories to give users the context they need. This will continue to be a journey of ongoing progress as our abilities grow and as the ecosystem of expression changes. That mission will never be fully accomplished. The ecosystem changes. By the way, several weeks ago, I did a deeply detailed interview with the Global Editors Network about our efforts with original reporting. I believe it's up on Medium. I urge you to read it. Also, last month, we introduced new tools to help websites and publishers around the world have more control over what information you make available on Google in the interest of your work and the work of your journalists and your brands to be found by audiences. I'll talk about these in more detail in a few minutes. Excuse me. As you know, I might need a bottle of water. As you know, there are interesting regulatory discussions happening around the world that are affecting the internet and the news industry. Magnificent. Just in time. As you know, there are interesting regulatory discussions happening around the world that are affecting the internet and the news industry. In general, I would ask you all to pay close attention to what's going on in the regulatory sphere. I'm going to talk about one component, but I can tell you as well, in all my work over the last several years in addressing misinformation, one of my largest concerns that's come out of that, yes, the misinformation problem is a significant one, but I've also seen well-intended as well as not so well-intended efforts in the regulatory sphere around the world to address misinformation legally. And unfortunately, in all too many cases, there are secondary consequences that dramatically impact free expression. So we need to pay very careful attention to what's going on here. But let's talk about copyright. Earlier this year, the European Union passed a new copyright directive, which appropriately gives European press publishers more control over the reproduction and communication of authored content. This summer, France became the first country to implement this part of the directive, passing a law that went into effect on October 24th, just last week. We fully respect copyright, and we respect the need to modernize it in the world of digital. We also respect the need, particularly in these times, to maintain open access to the internet itself. That is core to the role of journalism in an open society and the roles that each of us as citizens. We respect the importance for Google Search to be fair and equitable in helping users around the world find the information they need. We take seriously our role to help citizens of every society find the tools and information they need to be well-informed citizens. That means helping people find high-quality and trusted information from a diversity of sources: large traditional sources, global media players, new digital outlets, local news publishers, specialty sites in health or food, from the written word to the spoken word with podcasts and audio programming. By the way, I marvel at the amazing variety of players producing quality journalistic content today. We saw a bunch of it last night. Different areas of focus, different business models, different ways of connecting with readers. In Asia Pacific alone, we see local players such as Stuff in New Zealand expand their business model in quest of sustainability to include internet and electricity services. That's innovation. In Taiwan, we see digital pure players like Newslands among the most read news sites. Here in Hong Kong, we see a centennial outlet, the South China Morning Post, becoming a global digital voice and a leader in data journalism. And we see up-and-coming startups like Malaysia Kini and the Ken in India aiming to define, once again, the connection of journalism with its readers. So when users come to Google, we sort through all of those, the thousands, indeed millions of instances of online journalism focused on a particular topic, in quest of giving users the best information based on the relevance of the result to their search query. Google's users trust us, and we see this in research, because they perceive us to be principled and fair and equitable in connecting them with the work of this diverse array of publishers and journalists. And by the way, when we look beneath the data at those who don't trust us, it's because they have an inaccurate perception that people can purchase search result placements, which I think, as you know, is not true. That's why we don't accept any payment from anyone to be included in search results. Yes, we sell ads, not search results, and every ad is clearly marked and set apart from the actual results. But we don't accept payment from anyone to be included, and we won't pay for links to be included in search results. Doing so would skew the options we can and should provide. It would undermine the trust users have in how search and news work on Google, and it would damage open access to the internet itself. We're proud of how deeply users around the world trust us in giving them the best answers to their questions each and every second of the day. It is critical we respect that trust, ever so important in these tumultuous times. So how are we addressing this new copyright law and the rights of publishers online? And again, this applies to all of you. These tools are available to all of you. Currently, when we display news results, we show a headline which links directly to the relevant news site. For most results, but not all, we also display a short preview of the article, such as a few lines of text or a thumbnail image. These previews, I think, as you know, can help users decide whether a result is relevant to their search and whether they want to click on it. But not all results include previews. It has been the case for several years now that our top news results on search, as well as nearly all of our results in Google News, only use headlines with no previews, or what is often referred to as snippets. Why is that? Because news headlines are carefully written by journalists to inform the reader and compel their interest in going deeper. With news, previews are not as necessary. Indeed, over the years, publishers have expressed their concern that previews on news results might be giving away the story. Publishers were pleased when we made those changes in Google News several years back and on Google Search. And by the way, clicks went up. For many areas of content, for example, recipes, previews are highly useful in helping a user decide which result to click on. Most publishers are keenly aware of this and do various tests and experiments to see how best to present their content in the interest of it being found and accessed. So again, last month we released those new tools so you can decide which elements of content we can use in presenting your work. The tools provide more granular settings, allowing you to indicate whether a text snippet can be used and how long that text snippet might be. You can use those tools to indicate whether or not a thumbnail image can be used, and if yes, what size might that thumbnail image be, what resolution. Publishers can also indicate how many seconds of a video can be shown, if any, before clicking to see the entire video. Publishers can decide for themselves what types of previews work best in attracting people to their sites, and we will reflect those decisions in search and in news, and we are doing so today in France, where the law first went into effect. Again, as I noted, we never accept payment from anyone to be in search results, and we don't pay for links or promotional elements like snippets to be included in search results. Doing so, again, would skew the options we might provide, undermine the trust of users, damage open access to the internet itself. But let's ask a further question. How much value does Google Search bring to publishers and journalists to help enable their success from Google Search or Google News? Let's step back for a bit of context. Publishers want to be found by readers. This has always been the case. It's core to any publisher's efforts to grow its audience and grow its revenue. Traditionally, print publishers did this by paying newsstands to display their papers. You do this today. Google provides this service for free. We've never even thought of charging for being in search. And the traffic we drive is significant. As I mentioned, 24 billion visits each month to news publishers. And that traffic has real economic value. In Europe, Deloitte estimates that each click for a large news publisher is worth between 4 and 6 euro cents, which they can then use to build traffic, to build engagement, to build advertising revenue, build subscriptions. I'll let you do the math. Whether it's 5 cents or 1 cent, the numbers are huge. On the advertising front, yes, the vast competitive marketplace of the internet, as I described earlier, has disrupted the publishing industry. And again, user behaviors have changed. We've tried to help there as well. We provide advertising tools, auction systems, where publishers receive the vast majority of the revenue. Many of you, if not most of you, use our advertising marketplace tools. Last year, Google sent $14.5 billion to publishers around the world as a result of those agreements. But the behavior of advertising has changed in some ways, but in others, not at all. Advertisers have always preferred their message be associated with relevant content. Advertise cookpots next to recipes. But it has also become a fiercely efficient, performance-driven marketplace. That market efficiency has been a boon to small businesses, and that is no small part of our success as an advertising technology company. A family-owned Indian textile business can now cost-effectively reach potential customers in Singapore or Tokyo. Right? A cabinet maker in Perth can reach purchasers in Sydney or, for that matter, New Zealand or beyond. We're aware of the impact the internet has had on the publishing ecosystem. We believe it is important that we do our part in enabling a strong future for news. We invest in the future of news. Globally, I think we've contributed as much, if not more, than any other private entity towards the future of news. We do that, by the way, because in a sense, if you look at our business, if you look at what makes us successful, the popularity of Google Search is based on the fact that there is a relevant and valued ecosystem of expression on the open web. If you look at the success of our advertising tools, it's based on the fact that we only make money when publishers make money on the open web. So we don't do this just because we think it's a good idea. It's good for our business, it's good for your business. We are, in that regard, in this together. Google will continue to work alongside the news industry to address the challenges and opportunities we've talked about today. There's a lot more to do and more to learn together over the coming months and years. We will continue to invest in the future of journalism such that it can find models of independent sustainability. And we'll increase those investments. A year ago today, we announced our first Innovation Challenge in Asia Pacific. That was an open call for projects for news innovation around a specific theme. We rewarded 23 news organizations with investments to develop reader revenue. Since then, we've held 4 more innovation challenges around the world, receiving a total of 1,300 applications across 77 countries. Today, I'm pleased to announce we're back in Asia Pacific for round 2. This time, we're asking publishers to submit applications about how to drive reader engagement. You can learn more detail at another session held by my colleagues later today. I believe all of us can agree on this. And please tell me if you think I'm wrong about anything that I'm saying today. Journalism is best if it is independent in its form of support. I believe we can agree that it is important to be wary of reliance on the support of others, be they governments or partisan business interests or platforms whose success may not be as persistent or permanent as some might expect. Key to everything we've touched on today is a single word in terms of our efforts with the industry: collaboration, partnering to confront challenges like misinformation, evolving business models, and making use of new technology to further quality journalism. This has long been at the core of our efforts and will continue to be the spirit we bring to all our efforts as we move forward together. Google's success, interestingly, is greatest in open societies. The impact of journalism is also greatest in open societies. We have common objectives. Frankly, that's why I do the job I do. That's why I feel so passionate about what I do. When journalism succeeds, we all do better. And we're committed to these efforts I've described and plan to do more. And I look forward to continuing to work with you. I thank you very much.
I'll just hold it with Sandy and Gary. It's fine. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Richard Gingras again for that very enlightening and very interesting speech. A round of applause again for Richard. Now I'd like to invite Gary Liu and Sandy Prieto for a fireside chat to get the perspectives of some of the CEOs of some of the leading publications and journalist publications with regards to trying to create more sustainable revenues and also growing the revenue streams. Also look at the business side of things with regards to journalism and and how it's evolving in this day and age. Sandy, thank you so much for joining me. So just right now, we heard from Richard with regards to the changing and evolving nature, landscape, and the challenges facing publishers such as the South China Morning Post and the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Can you talk to us about how you've seen your business models evolve and changed over the last, let's just say the last decade or so, and how you guys anticipate it to evolve in the coming years as well? Gary, maybe we can start with you.
So I think that a lot of what the world that Richard painted in the beginning of his speech is very, very familiar to all of us. And this is exactly what the South China Morning Post has seen. We were a news organization that had a primary revenue channel. That primary revenue channel was classifieds and advertising. And had a lot to do with the fact that most of the newspapers represented in this room, to some degree, were local monopolies. And so because we were in every household, we were the primary source of information on a daily basis, we could capture the advertising marketplace, we could capture the marketing marketplace. There's a lot, especially in Asia as well, a lot of statutory revenue, government revenue that came through these news organizations. And so I think a newspaper like the South China Morning Post in many ways became reliant on the single source of income that frankly it was great for decades because it allowed the company to fund, as Richard put it, the hard news. It was a cross-subsidy that allowed the Post to do what we have to do for society. And of course, over the course of the last decade or so, much of that revenue has disappeared. The advertising stack has been disintermediated by technology. Consumers are shifting their overall discovery and consumption behavior, and then therefore also their purchase behavior, which means that the newspaper, the physical newspaper, is no longer the primary channel through which to communicate with potential purchasers of services and goods. And so we've had to, of course, react. And frankly, as an organization, that reaction time is still slower than we would want it. And part of our strategy, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, is that we recognize singular markets, like our home market of Hong Kong, is not large enough for not only our own ambition, but also in today's world of commoditized advertising is not large enough to fund the quality journalism that we so deeply believe in, feel convicted of, and for the rest of our existence as a news organization, we will be committed to. Which is also why, as a news organization, we have expanded beyond the boundaries of just Hong Kong. And our goal is to serve a much larger audience around the world, be able to draw revenue and be able to draw value out of that much larger audience as well.
As we know also, Sandy, the media landscape in the Philippines has changed quite significantly also. Can you talk about how the Philippine Daily Inquirer has gone from being a typical broadsheet to having an online presence as well? And how far along you guys are with regards to the development or the vision of where you guys want to take the Philippine Daily Inquirer?
Good morning, everyone. I think personally, I've been in the paper now for 25 years. And a big difference is what you can see even here in this conference. I've been attending one IFRA conferences over those 25 years. And the first, I think 75% of those conferences, a lot of it was based on newspaper. It is called, World Association of Newspapers. And it was thanks to my participation and our participation in those conferences that we got a glimpse of what the internet would be maybe about 15 years ago. And I had to go to the board and say, just give me a small room. We're going to start some, an internet website. And they were saying, but what's the business model? I said, I don't know yet, but let's start it up. And that's just the growth of that is exponential. If we can just show that slide that you graciously. Okay, so this is the Philippines. We're about 107 million Filipinos now. And mobile subscriptions, believe it or not, is more than the population at 124 million. And so a lot of people have 2-3 devices. Internet usage is up, despite the fact that it's quite slow and still in many parts of the Philippines. The internet service is quite sketchy. You still have 76 million Filipinos, and like as Gary said, the goal in the beginning was really to reach people abroad more than local users. So when we started up the internet, it was because there's about 10 million Filipinos abroad. So a lot of our audience came from there. So in terms of this internet users, this is a lot of it is in social media. And as you see, it's exactly the same. for those internet users and the active media social media users. The next slide will show you how many hours they spend. So it's a staggering amount of time, so 10 hours and 4 hours of that on social media. And the average daily TV viewing time, if you notice, social media has actually eclipsed TV time, which is very shocking in the Philippines, because the penetration of TV is 99%. I mean, every household has a TV set, and at 5 or 6 p.m. we're watching, teleserye, which is, everyone's glued on the TV. So time programming, as Gary was saying, is a big difference from then, where every the discovery is less now. It's more push than it is pull. Before, everyone had to be home at 6 p.m. to watch that. Now, they can watch it at any time. So that's why I think this has eclipsed. And then listening time is at 2 hours. So in terms of the day, my analogy is always very simple. Like before, to go up, like, in a building before, if you picture it, it's only the elevator, it's only the newspaper that you would get news. Now there's several ways to get up from one floor to the other. And that it was slow, but then eventually became a tsunami the last 5 years, simply because we also have laws that prevent in terms of you being able to use foreign material and foreign ownership, versus that through social media, the laws have not caught up there. So, and as Richard was saying, you have to be very careful in the laws that govern that. So there hasn't been a charter change in the last 30 years. So in terms of the newspaper being able to compete in that kind of space, it's we have to really look at it more as supplementary than it is competing. So about 10 years ago, the viewership of the internet was much higher now than the newspaper. So and as Gary was mentioning, we've had to constantly look at what it was to be able to still work on deep special reports and deep journalism, which costs. About 2 weeks ago, we had a special report, an investigative report on our health services, and there was a big anomaly there. And the journalists that worked on it for about 3 months. So that's a lot for a news organization to be able to do that. But it was very impactful. It exposed a lot of the wrongdoing. So that's still what we want to do, and it's very important that we do that. So as we have the fast, we definitely want to have a deep dive type of journalism where it exposes, just where there are areas that need attention. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that also, because as Richard highlighted a while ago, the key is also reaching your audience. What is the name of the game, or what is the key to the game with regards to getting to your audience or expanding your audience? Is it speed? Is it just being able to target efficiently where you think your readers are, or where your potential readers and consumers of your stories might actually be?
Well, the first thing that we need to acknowledge is actually everyone's audience is much larger now than it has ever been before. And so if no news organization in the world should have less readers, watchers, users than in the past. If you do, then you've squandered the opportunities that come with the internet. Niche scales now, regardless of how focused you are as an information gatherer and content creator. The internet has allowed you to reach a far larger audience than ever before. But that larger audience is extremely complex. It is distributed across so many different platforms, across many, many, many different countries. in completely different contexts from one person to another. And every single one of them seems to have different expectations of what content should look like and how information should get to them. So I think the key is actually understanding what your value is to an audience and understanding what those audience expectations are, and then building your news product to serve exactly that. It sounds more complicated than it actually is. I think news organizations should be able to identify a handful of needs, right, of people that our core expertise is to serve, and then everything that we build and everything that we pump out should have those key audience profiles, or whatever you want to call it, the targeting profiles, in mind as we create literally the technology for distribution, as we create the actual pieces of content, whether it is written or photo essays or video or whatnot, and as we plug in and choose the networks to participate in to get our content in front of our users. I think that kind of maniacal user focus is how news organizations in 2019 and going forward can grow, can really leverage the scale of the internet for growth.
Okay. Sandy?
If you don't mind, can we put that slide up again?
You weren't prepared.
I was just did this like 10 minutes ago, so thank you, Junie. Thank you.
Surprise.
So as you were asking, how have we grown? No? So we've gone from a single title to this now, and so to answer your question, what's more important? Is it depth or breadth? I think it's depth, both, and I think I want to use the word relevance as the important key engagement that is which each product or each touch point needs to consider. So the editor-in-chief that's on top of a story. It's almost like story by story. What you're saying is like, if it's a perishable, scoop or information that needs to get out right away after, of course, fact checking. And then there's some stories where you can wait and be able to think of how this can be more relevant to the audience. It's shocking, editors also now, that sometimes functional news like a list of holidays is going to be more shared than, let's say, a deep column opinion piece. So that's one internal maybe tweak that we had to do is for editors to also look at their audiences and what is information that's important, despite thinking that it's sometimes traditional information such as that, and an entertainment story. For example, recently in the Philippines, there was a big how do you say, involving a family of actors and actresses, and that a TV news network decided to devote 75% of its news to that story over general news items. And, so editors have to sit on stories like that and decide what is more important for that 30 minutes or that 5 minutes. And so engagement. So the rules have changed in terms of being able to think what is important and what is relevant. Before it was like editors would sit and say, "You need to know this today," and that's still important. But the half of it is being able to be relevant and see even functional news is important to them, as important as an opinion piece.
So we talk about growing your scope, going beyond the traditional boundaries also, but with growth, there has to also be a concept where you see revenues coming in, because monetizing it also is a different challenge. What do you think are the key challenges right now in making sure you can monetize this growth that both the Philippine Daily Inquirer and the South China Morning Post are trying to achieve outside of their own traditional enclaves, and as they try to grow their presence globally?
I just have one big challenge. There are many, but before I hand the phone to Gary, one is the news websites in the Philippines are not considering putting up a paywall or any pay meter, and So that is a big challenge, because then we're solely dependent on advertising. And I think recently someone wrote a very good piece and saying that ad-funded journalism is seeing its last days. So we have to think in the Philippines how we could be able to approach that. And that one, I think, is not just an individual but a more collective challenge. And so, do you make people pay for content, because to produce that content is getting more and more expensive. So that for me is a big challenge, because how do you again fund good journalism?
I mean, is putting up a paywall, Gary, is this where we're going towards? If I'm not mistaken, the South China Morning Post still doesn't have a paywall. Is this the only way towards, say, diversifying and sustaining revenue growth for some of our for news businesses in the future, or are there other ways from what you've seen?
I'm just going to add one before
Sure.
I pass it on. I believe it would help the independence of the media organization if we put in the hands of the subscriber or the viewer or reader the ability to be able to contribute to that journalism. That's my personal point.
I fully agree with that, by the way. Financial independence is the best way, if not really the only way, to protect editorial independence long term. I feel like we have this same conversation in every single conference, right? Like it's this exact same thing. What's broken about the news industry? We know the economics of the market is broken. We know that ad dollars are commoditized, that even with reach, most of us cannot make enough money to support our newsroom with just digital ads. We know that reader revenue, or subscriptions as we put it, is going to be key, that most news organizations need some form of reader revenue, where readers directly give us money for our news, for the value that we exchange with them. Many of us don't have it yet. South China Morning Post is not quite there yet, but we'll eventually need it. But the problem is that we have multiple generations that have now been raised that do not understand the concept of paying for news, because they've never had to pay for news before. So we have to change the value that we're providing for them, or at the very least, teach them why it matters. Is it the only way to a sustainable newsroom? I don't think so, but I do think that it is a core pillar for long-term sustainability. And I do think that news organizations just have to realize, and my team is so sick and tired of me saying this, is that we're going to end up needing 6, 7, 8 different primary revenue channels. There isn't singular revenue channel anymore, and you have to piece it all together. A lot of it is going to be ancillary to fund the newsroom. Richard mentioned this before. Major news organizations historically have had an immense amount of cash and have bought up ancillary businesses, but for whatever reason, maybe because they want those companies to go public on the public markets, they have been separate P&Ls, and the profit generated from those businesses have not funded the newsroom. So when the newsroom, the actual newspapers themselves stop printing money as they used to, the value created by grabbing ancillary assets, that value that value was squandered. And I think news organizations need to learn that skill again, even with lack of cash, that we can't acquire other ancillary business anymore. South China Morning Post cannot go out and buy a property business, but we can build new businesses that leverage the fact that we have access to information and we have access to users, and we can build ancillary businesses that may not be news for the sake of eventually funding the newsroom, which is always going to be our core, which is really the most important thing that we create. That's going to have to be a new muscle that we flex. Old muscle that's atrophied, but we're going to have to get it going again.
Get the muscle back in shape, basically.
Basically, some of us, again, they've atrophied to a point where we have no idea where they are, right? And honestly, we're trying to figure that out at the Post. Where are those muscles that we need to build up again, so that our core? Okay, now I don't even work out. I don't know why I'm using this analogy.
That makes two of us.
Yeah. But anyway, yes, that we have to learn, and thankfully, and here's the wonderful thing about the Asia Pacific region, is that there is innovation happening all around the region, and certain countries and certain places have invented or reinvented certain types of revenue channels for news. and then you go somewhere else and you find something different. And the fact that we can come together and have this kind of discourse on a regular basis means that we can learn from one another. And I'm going to pick and choose. I'm going to take a bunch of the ideas from all of you guys and assemble into one news company so that we can fund the South China Morning Post long term. That's going to be my strategy. I'm going to guess that that's going to be the strategy of a lot of people in the room.
I agree. Before, I used to go to the conferences, and a lot of the ideas came from the West. And the idea was, oh, they're much more ahead. So I'll Libre, for example, the free newspaper, came after I ended one of the conferences. So that space is already very short. So the idea is really to learn from each other, and in the region, it's more relevant, it's more applicable, and it's not just from one and being able to adapt it, with your particular environment. It's really being able to see from ideation phase and from consumer space what perspective, being able to see what others are doing and being able to learn from that and see how it can thrive in your own environment and factors in the elements. So it's very interesting how that also has changed in terms of being able to learn, because as Gary was saying, issues of convergence, integration, whether you integrate your newsroom or not, we're all commonly addressing that. And for the first time, I think there's no clear answer. I mean, do you integrate, do you not integrate? That debate is like 50-50. Unlike before, it was clearly 80%, integrate and 20%. So that's I think what has changed in the landscape, and being able to stay open and expose yourself is, I guess, one good way to be able to address those challenges.
All right. I'd like to open things up to the floor to see if anyone has any questions. I don't want to monopolize the discussion with Gary and Sandy also. So if anyone has a question, we'll have a mic going around the room. There you go.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jati from Indonesia, from Jawa Post Group. I think the first takeaway from both of you is that we agree that advertising revenue is not sustainable to fund journalism business going forward, especially digital newsroom. But Gary, you mentioned that one key area of success is that the ability to understand your audience and analyze them and serve them properly. How do you do that without having a paywall? How do you exactly dissect and understand your audience if it's very loose, comes and goes, and scattered all over? That's that.
It's a very good question. It comes down, it's data, right? And again, this is another buzzword that we throw around constantly. Most of us have different definitions of what quality data for news organizations look like. To simplify it, the way that we think about it is that when a user, any user, comes to one of our digital products, they trigger a series of events, right? They land, they come from a specific source, they come for a specific story, they go from one story to another. Even when they're scrolling or even when they're pausing on parts of the page, which means that they're paying more attention, or they've walked away to go to the bathroom, but we're pretty sure they're paying attention. All of these things are events. And if we lost the battery on this one. I'm relatively loud. Can you hear me in the back right now? Can we get another mic?
Yes.
By the way, I do want to get to a point at some point in my career that when I cough like Richard, 10 people rush with water. That's my goal in life. Thank you for giving me a new goal. Yeah. So we as news organizations, again in 2019, if we're not laser focused on the user, if we're not actual technology product companies, and if we cannot track every single one of those events and be able to parse that, right? Be able to piece together the journey of a user, we're already behind. So if you cannot tell when a user lands on your website where they come from and where they're going from one article to another, and then make assumptions about who they are and what they're interested in, then I'm sorry to say you're already behind. Without that, we can't understand the audience. Without that, we can't build product that actually serves individual personalized needs, and therefore we're going to lose out to everything else that can attract our users' attention, that provides a better discovery and consumption experience than our news sites do. That's the reality. It's a harsh reality, but that's it. Now, one thing I do want to warn the group on, is that over the course of just the last 6 months, at most 12 months, the global news industry has settled into a realization that this world that we live in today, where using cookies allows us to track these events, is going to go away. And the reality of that post-cookie world is likely to be much sooner than any of us want to admit. So we have a choice. If we don't already have that, how do we, first of all, get that information as quickly as possible, start understanding our audience, and how do we build for the future when our ability to track our user via cookies gets taken away by a whole array of things, including regulation and changes in how networks work, right? And web standards, I should say. So that's a whole nother wrench that I just threw into my own answer, but that is a future reality we need to start thinking about now. But today, we already should have the product and technology ability to track our users across our products, even without login. And if you can't do that, that should be a primary priority for your organization to figure out how to do that on your digital products.
I think Gary completely answered that question. So I'm just going to add is what your people, your editors, your marketing guys do with that data is the next important step. Because sometimes, like, okay, let's say, for example, we had a story on the win of Manny Pacquiao. So in the newspaper, it said it's Christmas Day, and that doesn't translate well in online because it's not searchable. So what you do with that data is I think also just an equal element of the process. So that's what you have to make sure that your people are trained and are open to that kind of data.
Let me add one more thing. I will give an example. I think examples are really important here. As news organizations, I think that the gut feeling is that when a user reads hard news, that they want more and more of the same thing. For whatever reason, I think if you were to ask the editorial team, especially in my newsroom, hey, the China news experts who come in and read about Chinese military, that's what they want. They come in very specifically for Chinese military. They're going to read more Chinese military. So if we go by just gut, our product will be designed so that if you come in first on a Chinese military article, that's what our algorithm is going to serve you over and over and over again. And that's what we originally were building. But what the data actually told us is that for the sake of loyalty, for somebody to come back in over and over again and stay with us for a long time, they actually want and need variety of content. That was the trigger for them deciding to come back to the South China Morning Post multiple times a month, was if they see a variety of content. Even if they are Chinese military experts, sometimes they want to break from that too. And so without being able to track the activity and the events triggered by this audience, we would have built an algorithm that only gives Chinese military readers more Chinese military stuff, and they would have all eventually left or only come to us once every 6 months when the Chinese military launches a new missile or whatever, right? But now, because they've seen a sports article and a culture article and a technology article, they realize that we can serve a lot of their information needs, and they become much more loyal to the brand. That is something that data told us that changed the way that our gut felt.
All right. Unfortunately, I believe we've run out of time actually for this this very engaging discussion. But don't fret, Gary and Sandy will be around the premises, so if you'd like to engage them at some point over a coffee or whatnot. I'd like to thank Gary Liu, CEO of the South China Morning Post, and Sandy Prieto, the CEO of the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Appreciate your insights and very vivid reflection. Before po, yes. In Singapore.